Ellen Fanning, you're watching RNTV, and my guest now is the ABC Managing Director Mark Scott, who's in our Melbourne studios this morning. Mr Scott, welcome back to RN Breakfast.
Yes, good morning, Ellen.
Has the government broken its promises to the ABC and SBS?
Well, I'm not going to get involved in the political fight over all this, but I think it's very clear to all ABC audiences that a commitment was made in advance of the election of no funding cut to the ABC and SBS. And if we look at the budget figures from last night, we see $120 million taken out of the ABC budget over the next 4 years. The bulk of that is Australian network, but also money cut from us for our domestic operations as well.
How hard will these cuts hit the ABC in terms of job cuts, but also in terms of the programs that Australians enjoy?
Well, it's very significant. The ABC has in our charter an obligation to be an international broadcaster. We have to tell Australian stories into the region, and the budget for our international services has now been cut by more than half.
How do you continue to do that if you don't have the Australian network?
Well, that's a question we've got to look at today. The official notification of this only landed through the budget and in a letter that arrived at 10 o'clock last night. So our priority today is look at how we continue to deliver an international broadcasting service at a time when that budget's been more than cut. But there's no doubt, more than halved. There's no doubt that we have to run a significant redundancy round. We would anticipate cut back our programming options certainly into the region. And also we need to look at, say, the staffing of our foreign bureaus. Some of the staff in our foreign bureaus have been put there with funding for Australian network. They have been delivering into Australian network and also back to Australian domestic services. So we have to look at our staffing, we have to look at our programming, and that's all a priority for us this morning.
It's a challenge because in a sense you have to unscramble the egg. The Australian network funding has essentially been woven into the fabric of the ABC. What's your policy position on this? Do you find cuts in other parts of the organisation to ensure that Asia-Pacific coverage in particular remains strong, or does everybody across the organisation bear the burden?
Well, it's a bit early to say that, Ellen. We have a responsibility, a legal responsibility in our charter to be an international broadcaster. So we need to work out how we can do that now. This is particularly disappointing in that we're only 1 year into a 10-year contract with DFAT, and all the key performance targets that we set out in that contract we were on target to meet. We'd been significantly growing our audiences. We'd started a number of very significant partnerships with the major broadcasters in the region, and we had developed a tremendous following on social media. And so on all criteria, our international broadcasting was a tremendous success. And so it's terribly disappointing to cut it. And so now we have to know, well, what could we possibly continue to do, given the fact that $20 million worth of funding is being taken out of our budget for this every year? What do we continue to do and what do we have to stop? And that's what we're looking at right now.
Do you think this is payback for the controversial contracting process conducted under the former Minister Stephen Conroy, which gave the Australian network contract to the ABC rather than Rupert Murdoch's TV interests?
Well, that's not for me to say. I mean, nobody thought that was a smooth or effective process, but what I would say is that no government around the world had taken its international broadcasting service and put it in the hands of a private sector media organisation. If you look around the world, there are a number of trends that are evident. One is that there is a significant increase in the amount of international broadcasting that's being done as part of public diplomacy. So Australia's decision last night flies in the face of what nearly all other G20 countries are doing. And certainly no other country has put it in the hands of a private sector provider. That was a very messy process. We warned against going to tender at the time. But I must say I'm disappointed in the lack of, I think, substantive consultation around this decision. We've had very little time with the Minister.
The Foreign Affairs Minister? Or
the Foreign Affairs Minister.
Were you able to put this to Julie Bishop directly? Were you able to put these arguments?
The Chairman had a very brief meeting with her. We've had discussions with her staff, but I must say my feeling is that a decision around this was made a long time ago, and there wasn't a great openness to the evidence because the evidence is very clear. We have been performing well, we have been growing the audience, and we have been targeting the audience that we agreed with DFAT that we needed to target, and that was the rising middle class of Asia, people who are going to do business with us, people who are going to trade with us, people who are going to travel here, people who are going to send their children to study here. And not only were we getting our stories out to them, we were using international broadcasters to dramatically dramatically expand our reach. We have a deal at the moment with the biggest broadcaster in Indonesia, which is taking our Australian stories to audiences of more than 100 million people. That's the potential audience that can watch our stories this month. Now, that's absolutely on strategy, and so we're very disappointed that this unilateral decision has been made to cut that funding.
Very briefly to the deal with the Shanghai Television Company, where you're going to have co-productions, resources going one way and another between Australia and China. Can you continue to do that? Is it separate from the Australian network? Because that seems a very significant thing for Australia.
The deals we've struck in the region with the Indonesian broadcasters, with the Chinese broadcasters are very significant. They fundamentally are deals with the ABC. We need to look at how we keep them alive and how we keep the tremendous opportunity that we've created to communicate with the people of the region. This isn't the diplomatic cocktail circuit. This is people-to-people diplomacy that media opportunities create. And we're going to look very hard at how we can keep those deals alive in light of this very significant unilateral funding cut.
The budget papers say these cuts are a down payment on the ABC and SBS efficiency study, suggesting there might be further cuts and job losses later this year. Now, I imagine you've seen this efficiency study. What does the government want from the ABC?
Well, I've seen a draft of it. Look, the ABC supports efficiencies. We want to save as much money as we can, but if you look at where we've found efficiencies in recent years, we've found efficiencies and we've invested in things like iView and News 24, News Breakfast, all our online sites and our online apps. They were all funded by efficiencies found by the ABC. And so we are very concerned at a suggestion that if we continue to find efficiencies, we can't invest in new services for our audiences. All the new investments we've done have had a tremendous response from our audiences. Millions of people use those services every month. And so our concern is if we find further efficiencies, they're just swept off the table, and that fundamentally could weaken the ABC as a viable public broadcaster of the digital era. So this is going to be a point of some debate and consultation with the Communications Minister, I think, in the months ahead. I think we are in heated agreement that we want the ABC to be as efficient and effective as possible. Where I think we might part company is how we use that money. We want to use that money to reinvest it in the ABC, and that's what Well, I think there would be some forces in the government that would simply want to return that money to Treasury. But if you look at the evidence, nearly 9 in 10 Australians believe that the ABC today provides a valuable or very valuable service. 3/4 of the adult population watch, listen or log in every week. We have the overwhelming majority of children looking at our content every week. The Australian public is very happy with the ABC's funding level today, and the prospect that we're going to rip millions more out and curtail the ABC's ability to reinvest in the ABC's future, I think would not be greeted with support from the Australian people, and I'll be making those arguments in Canberra.
There's no doubt that you've been an innovator in your time as leader of the ABC. As you've said yourself, there's been iView, multi-platform, new television networks. In the end, though, have you Vegemited the funding too thinly across the organisation, leaving it vulnerable to these sorts of cuts that, some would say are inevitable?
No, I don't think so, Ellen. I mean, fundamentally, the ABC would be much weaker today if we weren't leaders in innovation, if we hadn't paved the pathway to catch up television with iView, if we hadn't gone down the multi-channel road. I think as a broadcaster, you have no alternative but to invest in the digital future of the organisation. I think we would have been more vulnerable if we'd just been an old-fashioned radio or television network with one TV channel, with only a couple of radio channels, with no online and mobile presence. Our audiences would be smaller, would be less relevant. We are relevant and compelling to the Australian public today because of the investment we made in the new. And so that's been a very important thing for us to do. It's strengthened the ABC. And I think the government needs to understand that the ABC is the most trusted and most respected media organisation in the country. And we have the overwhelming support of the vast majority of the Australian public. And when they consider our funding future, they should consider the very important role the ABC plays in the life of millions of Australians every day.
Mr. Scott, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Ellen.
The ABC Managing Director Mark Scott speaking there from Melbourne.